Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Well, hello there, Jen.
Hey, Kim, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing fine.
Oh, good. I like that.
I know. It's nice and rainy here, and you were just telling me before we started to record that you love the rain.
I do.
Except it's been raining so much. It's going to flood. We're all flooded out here.
That part I'm sad about, but I still like rain, so I'll take it.
Yeah. Before we start, little housekeeping here. It seems we've been told that Apple has updated their app, I guess. They did a while ago, but we just are now catching up on it. And sometimes, I guess, some people that are using Apple as their podcast app to listen to us, it kind of took away some stuff, like for automatic downloads and stuff. So if you listen to us and if you follow us and you listen to us on Apple, if you could go to the page of our True Crime Podcast, the front page, hit the three dots that are to the top right. And then once you hit that, go down to settings, hit settings. And then at the bottom, it says automatically download. If you could hit that and said if you want it to be like 5 episodes, 2 episodes, 1 episode, that would greatly help us. Mm-hmm. It seems that when they did that, it starts to affect our numbers. And our numbers is what helps us get ads and such like that. Not that we care about getting paid. It just kind of helps us get some money. I mean, we never ask you to join our Patreon. We never ask you to buy our merch, which half of you probably don't even know we have merch. But anyway, if you could do that, it's the little way you can help us achieve to keep doing this.
To keep me in my mansion that I'm so accustomed to.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's it. But that's all I have to say. Okay. So if you want, I can start the episode. And if you have any questions about that, you can email us or DM us and I'll walk you through it.
Not even just for ad revenue. It helps us see like what episodes do better, do worse, like where they, you know what I mean? And it kind of helps just let us know how we're doing too.
Yeah. And everything else is fine. It's just Apple that we're having problems with. But anyway, on to the case for this week.
I'm ready.
So this case was requested a while back, and I'm sorry it's taken so long, and I'm also sorry that I forgot to write down who it was. I did spend an hour yesterday going through all our emails from Google Mail, all our DMs on Instagram and X or Twitter, and I could not find it. But I do remember I can see it in my head. I want to say the name begins with a T, but that could be completely off too. So my apologies. So if this is you, let me know and I will make sure to put your name in the show notes. And also, I did find that there are a lot of emails that have gone unanswered. I apologize, and I'm going to try to work on that this week.
Oh, okay.
So if you wrote to us in 2018 and you haven't received an email, you're going to get one this week, buddy. My apologies. Yeah, our apologies. So, All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
On a warm, partly cloudy night in Vidor, Texas, a newspaper boy, up early for his route, noticed that a black 1991 Mercury sedan was pitched forward in a ditch just off Interstate 10. The ditch was located between West Bolivar and the freeway access road. He immediately called the police to report the vehicle and that he was pretty sure that there was a body in the front seat. With a population of just over 9,000 people, Vidor, Texas is just a 20-minute drive from the Louisiana state line. According to Vidor's city website, Vidor is home to, quote, no less than 5 world-famous country and western superstars, a Miss Texas, an Olympic gold medalist, 2 world-famous opera singers, a world-famous artist, and more published musicians and singer-songwriters than any one city outside of Nashville, Tennessee. But starting in the 1990s, it became famous for something far less distinguished. 3 billboards.
Oh.
It was 5 a.m. when the police arrived on the scene at West Bolivar and I-10. They immediately saw that there was a body, a woman sitting behind the steering wheel of a car. Her body was upright, back against the seat, and her head was turned toward the right, slightly nestled against the headrest. Her feet were pulled back towards the seat, and she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. When officers called out, "Ma'am," she didn't respond. They checked for a pulse and found that she was dead. The woman's purse and ID were sitting upright on the car's floorboard, but the police already knew who she was. Kathy Page was the wife of Steve Page, whom Detective Ray Mosely had known for most of his life. The home of Steve and Kathy Page was at 450 Green Street, just 100 yards from the ditch where her car came to rest. The car was faced away from the direction of the house as if she were on her way out, not on her way home. Considering she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, if she had been going at a high speed, it was theoretically possible that she could have smashed her head onto the windshield of the car, or maybe slammed her head on the steering wheel hard enough to break her neck or inflict some other fatal wound. But since the vehicle's direction indicated that she was traveling away from the house, would she have been able to accelerate to a deadly speed in 100 yards? Even if she could have gained enough speed in that short of distance to cause fatal injuries, she wouldn't have been sitting upright. Her body would have been slumped forward. And even if she could have managed to somehow fling back against the seat, you would think that she would have had blood and obvious trauma-like cuts to her face. The only marks officers could find on her face were the beginning of a black eye. And she had an obvious broken nose. But there was no blood found anywhere in the car except on the headrest and on the back of her head. If she had sustained the broken nose in the accident, there would have been blood all over her face, trailing from her nose and possibly down the front of her, but there wasn't. Walking around the car, the officers also noted that there were no skid marks from slamming on the brakes as one usually does when they realize they're veering off the road and into a ditch. The car evidence indicated that the car made a slow roll into the ditch and no brakes had been applied. The car was quite tidy except for 2 Whataburger cups in the floorboard. And remember, Kathy's purse was also sitting upright, and if she had met with some high-speed impact, the purse, as well as Kathy, would have been knocked over. The police also noticed that the rearview mirror was turned all the way to the right, to where the side of it was nearly touching the windshield, as if somebody had accidentally nudged it. The position of the rearview mirror couldn't have been a result of the car rolling into the ditch, and Kathy's head didn't make contact with it, and she obviously wouldn't have driven with the mirror in that position. All these things, the position of the body and the purse, the lack of blood in the vehicle, the lack of skid marks, and the position of the rearview mirror, plus the fact that her feet weren't even near the brake or gas pedals, because, the feet were tucked up back against the seat. This all led police to think that this was a staged accident. It was obvious that Kathy Page had been dead before the car had veered into the ditch. And if that wasn't enough to convince them, the handprint around her neck was. The mark on her neck was made by a left hand. Precinct 4 Justice of the Peace Sherry Smith was called to the scene, where she pronounced Kathy dead and ordered an autopsy. Closer inspection revealed that a blade of grass on the back of her pants suggested that her body had been dragged at some point. She wore no makeup, watch, jewelry, or wedding band. There was also some blood found on her underwear and on the inside of her clothing, but not the outside, indicating that the clothes were put on the body after she was murdered. Detective Mosely put her body in an ambulance to transport her to the hospital. Then he had the car impounded. He then made the 100-yard drive to the Page household to inform Steve that his wife was dead. Lucille Catherine Kathy Fulton was born in January 1957 into a close-knit family. Her parents, James and Dorothy Fulton, were proud parents of 2 sons and 4 daughters, giving Kathy a home and an upbringing with plenty of nurturing and security. Kathy had a warm and easy smile and was a longtime resident of Southwest Texas. At 21, Kathy found herself pregnant by the man she'd been seeing, Steve Page. Steve, who divorced from his first wife, had just become final in August of 1978. He married Kathy in November of the same year. The 2 welcomed their first child, Aaron, the following May, and a second daughter, Monica, came along in 1983. It's been said that Steve was seeing Kathy while he was still married to his first wife, but there's no proof. But there is math, and that kind of lines up, but we can't for sure say because there's no proof for us to find. I'm just putting it out there. Kathy relished her job as a wife and mother. Her daughters played sports and enjoyed spending time with both sides of her family. Sometime around 1990 or early 1991, Kathy got a job as a waitress at the Hofbräu restaurant in nearby Beaumont, Texas, and she started taking classes at a community college. Steve and Kathy began to have troubles in their marriage, and according to Steve, in an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, Kathy told him that she just needed, to find herself.
Mm-hmm.
Since they married so young and Kathy became a mother right away, Kathy, quote, didn't know who she was. But Kathy's sister Sherry would later testify that Steve and Kathy had an argument on May 6, 1991, a week before her murder, and Kathy had asked him to move out. Also, according to Sherry, Steve had been sleeping on the couch for some time before that argument, and Kathy was planning to divorce Steve. Steve, of course, denies this, and his daughter Erin said that she never saw her parents fight, and that Steve was not sleeping on the couch. However, daughter Monica said that she and her mother Kathy had been sharing a room, the insinuation being that Kathy and Steve were not sleeping together. Unfortunately, this, he said, she said, back and forth is how this entire case is going to go. Almost always, the testimonies were split down the middle, with Kathy's family saying one thing and Steve's family saying another, and the problem was obvious. One side has to be lying. The day before Kathy's murder, the whole family went to the beach for Mother's Day. Then they came home and Steve fried some shrimp for dinner. Steve and Kathy wanted to ensure that the kids had a good day, so spending it together seemed like the right thing to do, even though they were newly separated. After dinner, Steve went to his new apartment and slept there. The next day, Monday the 13th, Steve went to Kathy's house to help prepare the girls for school and drop them off. He then ran some business-related errands. The girls had softball games that afternoon. Steve and Kathy went separately. Kathy returned home with Monica while Steve stayed with Erin until her game ended. Steve and Erin returned to the house around 9:30, 10 p.m., and then Steve went home. Kathy did have plans that evening, but she couldn't find anybody to babysit, so she called Steve to ask if he would come back to the house and watch the kids while she went out with friends. And Steve agreed. When he arrived at the house, he parked on the far side of the carport because Kathy had parked next to the house as she usually did. Kathy had just gotten out of the shower when he arrived. She got dressed, put on her makeup, fixed her hair, put on her jewelry and a watch, and then left to go see her friend. Sometime after that, Kathy met a violent end, and her body was placed behind the steering wheel of her car. Now Detective Mosely and Lieutenant Carter had to break the awful news to her husband, Steve. When the officer approached the house, all the lights were off. Steve answered the door in his boxer shorts. He immediately said that Kathy wasn't home and that the police were there about her. Detective Mosely said that Steve glanced down the road in the direction of where Kathy's car had been found. That wouldn't have been entirely unusual since that is the direction that she would have driven if she were leaving the house and also the direction that she would have been if she was returning home. When the police entered the home, they asked Steve to turn on the lights, but he refused. Lieutenant Carter informed Steve that Kathy was dead, and Steve threw himself onto the couch and started to cry. But when Carter shined his flashlight onto Steve, Steve didn't have any tears on his face. Mosely noticed that there were clothes on the living room floor. After 15 or 20 minutes, the officers left the house. Not only had Steve never turned on the light as he was asked, but he also never asked if he could see Kathy or asked any questions about her death, nor did he go down to the scene of the accident. Told them he didn't want an autopsy done on Kathy. He didn't want anybody cutting on her.
What?
Mm-hmm. Not turning on the lights is really odd, right? You would think that the police would make him turn on the lights so they could see things properly, right?
Yeah, like maybe scratches, you know.
Mm-hmm. None of that was done. And for some unknown reason, the home wasn't treated as a crime scene. No photos were taken of Steve that night. In fact, the police at the scene were so on the ball, seriously, okay, get this, that they forgot to put film in the camera when they photographed the accident.
Okay.
It seems like these are very Barney Fife type things where they have to keep the bullet in the pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah. No photos, no film in the camera. The police told Steve that they thought the car accident had been staged and that Kathy had most likely been strangled. And by doing this in the dark at his home, instead of waiting until they questioned him formally, they lost the ability to properly record his reaction to the news. Steve had told the police that Kathy had gone out with her friend Charlotte. But when police questioned Charlotte, she told them that she hadn't gone out with Kathy, but rather she was Kathy's cover for the night. Kathy had started seeing a prominent man in town. In fact, he was so prominent that his name has still never been released to the public. Kathy had met this man at a hotel for the evening, and she had asked Charlotte to cover for her if Steve happened to call. Kathy reminded her not to answer the phone because the two of them were supposed to be out at a bar, the two of them meaning her and Charlotte. Charlotte's phone did ring at about 2:30 in the morning, and thinking it was Steve, she didn't answer it. But she said that Steve called again at 5:30 or 6 a.m., thinking that Kathy would have been home, long before 5:30 in the morning. So Charlotte assumed the call was from somebody else, and so she answered it. And it was Steve, and he wanted to know where Kathy was. And she told them that they'd been out together that night, but Kathy had left to go home at about 3 a.m. Charlotte immediately hung up and called the hotel where Kathy was meeting this new man to warn her that Steve was looking for her. And for all Charlotte knew, Kathy had just fallen asleep or lost track of time. But there was no answer at the hotel room. And it didn't take her long to learn why. Her friend was dead. And incidentally, just to let you know, Steve would have known that Kathy was already dead when he phoned Charlotte at 5:30 in the morning. Because the police were at the car accident at 5. They only stayed for 15 and 20 minutes, and then they went to tell Steve, who was just 100 yards away.
Something's not right.
You think? By 7 a.m., Steve and Kathy's house was full of people. Kathy's parents, Dorothy and James Fulton, arrived at about 6:30 a.m. and said they noticed Steve walking around the living room, wiping his hands with a wet bath cloth. Dorothy claimed Steve had a scratch on his nose. However, since no photos were taken of Steve that morning by the police, there's no proof of that. And by the time Steve was questioned the next day, and it didn't seem to appear that he had a scratch on his nose. She also noticed that Steve had already been doing laundry that morning. Even if doing laundry isn't indicative of guilt, it did seem strange that he'd found out his wife had just been murdered, and his first thought is to do his laundry. Because remember, he wasn't even living there anymore, and his clothes were at his apartment. And there were clothes on hangers on the living room floor, even though there was more than enough room to hang clothes. I mean, almost as if he didn't want people to notice that a particular spot on the floor. And while the neighbor, who had also arrived, didn't remember seeing Steve do laundry, a reverend came in the house and said that when he arrived, it was still dark and that the washing machine was on the spin cycle. Kathy's sister Jan, who arrived at about 6:15 a.m., also said that Steve had been doing laundry. But Steve's brother Ronnie had said that he didn't remember the washing machine running, but later, at some point, they had washed the girls' sheets. The Fultons noticed that Kathy's bed had not been slept in. Who are you going to believe? The sister of Kathy, the brother of Steve, or a person of the cloth that has no skin in the game?
Yeah.
Steve, of course, denied that he'd been doing any laundry at all. At this point, both daughters were still asleep. Monica had apparently spent the night in her own room instead of her mother's room, and nobody knew much in the way of facts. Even though the police had informed Steve that his wife had been strangled, he told Kathy's parents that Kathy had been out drinking and she had driven off the road into a ditch and had possibly broken her neck. It was also at this time that Steve told the Fultons that he hoped the police never found Kathy's killer, which he, of course, later denied. Steve also said that he had heard rumors that Kathy had been using cocaine and using drugs, which was not true. Steve's a keeper. And while Steve didn't want an autopsy on Kathy, Kathy's dad gave police permission. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Oscar Griffin, with a member of the Harris County Medical's examiner's office called in to consult, and they concluded that Kathy Page died of asphyxiation due to strangulation. And I know it bugs a lot of our listeners that we say that wrong, but I think I said asphyxiation correctly this time.
Don't ask me, Jen.
I know. We both say it wrong, so it's a coin toss today. All right. It also showed that Kathy had had sex the night of her murder with somebody who had undergone a vasectomy. Because there was seminal fluid found inside of Kathy, that fluid didn't contain any sperm. Police found the man that Kathy had been seeing at the hotel. They brought him in for questioning and gave him a polygraph test. And he passed the polygraph test with flying colors. He cooperated fully, and his story about when he last saw Kathy and when he got home all checked out. Furthermore, the man she was having an affair with hadn't had a vasectomy. The lack of sperm during the autopsy indicates that Kathy either didn't have sex that night with the man she was seeing or that he used a condom. Otherwise, there would have been sperm and with the seminal fluid. But you want to guess who has had a vasectomy?
Is it Steve?
Steve, yeah. Kathy's estranged husband, Steve, had a vasectomy just a few months before Kathy was murdered. So the presence of seminal fluid minus the sperm meant that Kathy had had sex, whether willingly or not, with Steve the night of her murder. Kathy's daughter, Erin and Monica, woke up at about 8 a.m. the morning of the murder, having slept through the night without hearing anything unusual. Monica was 7 at the time and Erin was 12. While the official statement is that neither girl awoke during the night, it's also stated in the court records that one of the girls had soiled their sheets in the middle of the night, and that those sheets had to be washed. And those sheets could not have been washed when Steve was washing when the Fultons arrived because both the girls were still sleeping. Remember, they got there about 6:30. The girls didn't wake up until 8. Steve was officially questioned the next day. He claimed that he didn't know that Kathy was seeing somebody else, even though witnesses said they'd heard him refer to Kathy as having a boyfriend the day before. Still, no warrant was ever sought to search Steve and Kathy's house. When the results of the autopsy came back and showed that there was seminal fluid without sperm inside Kathy, Steve added to the story. Originally, he said Kathy had gone out, but he didn't know where, and she never came back home. However, confronted with the fact that Kathy had sex with somebody on the night she was murdered, who had also been a man who'd had a vasectomy, Steve said that when he arrived at the house that night of the murder to babysit the kids, Kathy just had come out of the shower wrapped in a towel. Steve now said that he approached Kathy for sex and that she agreed, and that they had had sex on the living room floor. Then she dressed, put on her makeup and jewelry, and went out for the night. Now, to Kathy's sisters, and anybody, I should say, really, this is hard to believe. They didn't believe that Kathy would have had sex with a man she was divorcing just hours before she was going to go see the new person in her life.
Absolutely not.
Right. Kathy and Steve had not been intimate for a while, and it made no sense that she would have sex with him before going out on her date. Just all of a sudden decide, we haven't had sex for months, but let's do it now before I go out to see this guy I like. Also, when Kathy's body was found, she didn't have any makeup on, or jewelry, or socks for that matter. Kathy's sister Sherry said she had visited Kathy and Steve's home on Wednesday, 2 days after the murder, and that she saw Steve and a friend going through the house with a manila envelope and putting items into the envelope. Steve said it was just a paper bag full of candy for the kids. So the insinuation here is that Steve was gathering the jewelry and watch that Kathy had worn the evening of her date. Because if police could prove that Kathy had returned home, Steve would be their number one suspect. If they couldn't prove Kathy ever came home, then anybody could have killed her. This, by the way, would have been easily proven if the police had searched the house when they should have, or at all, to be honest. Sherry also said that there was a very strong disinfectant type of odor in the house. There's also oscillating fans in the kitchen that Steve said were there to dry out the carpet because he had cleaned it after he had spilled some grease on it. Now, this spot on the carpet seemed to be at the center of many curious incidences. First, Kathy's sister said that Steve told her that Kathy had shaved her legs and bled on that spot on the carpet. Second, on this exact same spot is where Steve now said that he and Kathy had had sex. Now he's saying that he had spilled grease on that spot. I mean, he may as well have painted a great big X right on that spot.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't matter because the police never got a warrant to search the house. However, Kathy's father, James Fulton, latched onto this grease spot. Steve claimed that he had missed the trash pickup day and decided to burn some of the trash in the backyard. And as he carried the trash out, a mayonnaise jar full of grease fell out, and the lid popped off and rolled 6 feet or so onto the carpet. Their daughter, Erin, personally testified that she witnessed the jar of grease spilling but couldn't remember what day it occurred. Monica, on the other hand, testified that no grease was spilled. Other members of Steve's family claimed to have witnessed the grease being spilled. However, when Kathy's father, James, witnessed Steve and several of his family members cleaning the carpet, he realized at that moment that Steve had killed Kathy. Because the path to the side door, where he was going to take the trash out, was covered with linoleum, and there was no real reason for that jar to end up in the living room. And even if it had somehow rolled that far, it would have left a trail of grease, leading to that final resting spot. It wouldn't have just been one section in the middle of a carpeted room. And yet that was the only spot that was cleaned. They hadn't cleaned a trail of grease. They'd just cleaned one spot. In the meantime, Steve's sister was questioned, and he stated that contrary to what police said and what Kathy's family said, quote, Steve cried real tears, and she didn't see any blood anywhere. According to Kathy's sister, Sherry, Steve looked distraught at the funeral, but he wasn't crying. Her family also said that Steve wouldn't say Kathy's name at the funeral and referred to Kathy's body in the casket as it.
Ew.
That is gross. After the funeral, Kathy's family noticed that every time they put flowers on her grave, the flowers would be kicked over or strewn about the cemetery. It's as if somebody was angry that her family dared to leave flowers on the beloved daughter's grave. And tired of having her grave vandalized, the family put a camera in the cemetery. And guess who was caught?
Steve.
Right there on camera, kicking the flowers off Kathy's grave. When he was confronted, Steve said he had kicked the flowers out of anger because the flowers, quote, were so cheap. Yet I don't believe he replaced those flowers with fancier, expensive ones.
And they're outside. Ugh.
And on it went. Kathy's family would accuse Steve or his family of something, and Steve and his family either denied it or had an explanation for whatever it was, or just flat out lied. Steve's family claimed that Kathy's family was just taking their pain, anger, and frustration out on Steve because the police were unable to find Kathy's real killer. At one point, Steve's family accused Kathy's family of making physical threats towards Erin and Monica. I mean, why in the world would Kathy's family want to hurt their own granddaughters and nieces? They were the only thing they had left of Kathy, right? But the point is that this volley back and forth just kept getting worse. Nobody could even agree on whether Steve was left-handed or not. Kathy's killer had used his left hand to strangle her, and some people said they had seen Steve use his right hand. Others said he used his left. And some said that he often just used both hands to do certain things. Just because Kathy was killed by a man using his left hand, though, doesn't necessarily mean that this was the killer's dominant hand. The authorities have never charged Steve with the murder of Kathy Page. They say that there's just not enough evidence. But in 2000, Kathy's parents brought a wrongful death suit against Steve Page, and the jury found him guilty. They felt as though he was responsible for Kathy's death. And on appeal, the court upheld the decision. While authorities claim that there's not a lot of direct physical evidence against Steve, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence. Plus, there is the question of who else could have murdered her. I mean, who else would have had the motive to murder her? And who else would have had the means? Prosecutors went down a checklist of questions and scenarios that led back to Steve. When Kathy left for a date, she was not only fully dressed, but she had on makeup, jewelry, and her watch. When her body was found in an obviously staged crime scene, she had none of those things. Plus, her socks were missing. This told prosecutors that Kathy had returned home, went through her nightly routine of taking a shower before bed and removing her makeup and jewelry. Plus, the direction of her car like we said, was the wrong way for her to have been on her way home for when she had the accident in the ditch. Kathy had obviously been redressed, with her killer forgetting to put her socks and jewelry on her. The working scenario is that Kathy came home from her date, in which Steve confronted her about where she had been. There was an argument, and then Steve raped, beat, and killed Kathy, redressed her, and staged the accident. Since Steve's car was found parked where Kathy usually parked, it also made authorities wonder if Steve had maybe left the house in the middle of the night to spy on Kathy. In her kitchen, on a random piece of paper, Kathy had scratched out the number for the hotel in Beaumont. The piece of paper didn't say that it was the number to the hotel, it was just a phone number. Police wondered if Steve could have called the number, then realized it was a hotel and left the girl sleeping in the middle of the night to go find Kathy. Then, when he returned, Steve parked his car in the different location, which was where Kathy normally parked. The fact that they had had sex in the middle of the living room floor, when she had perfectly good bed and a couch, also lends credence to the quick and sudden attack. The fact that Steve seemed to be preoccupied with the spot on the floor also leads one to believe that something happened in that spot that he didn't want anybody to know about. Kathy's broken nose had bled a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Her autopsy had revealed that she had a lot of blood loss. Some feel that the same place Steve raped her is where he beat her, and she would have bled onto the carpet. According to some sources, the phone records were never checked, which could have answered some of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody other than Steve to have killed Kathy, they would have had to follow her home, wait until she showered and gotten ready for bed, kill her, then put her in the car to make it look like she died in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention, Steve was in the house. So how would this have happened without Steve knowing about it? When questioned, the man she was with at the hotel never indicated that Kathy had showered or taken off her jewelry at the hotel. And indeed, why would she have? If she would have been trying to hide the fact that she was seeing somebody from Steve, she would have returned home where Steve was babysitting in the exact same condition she left. Coming home freshly showered with makeup removed and missing jewelry would have sent alarm bells through Steve. So showering before coming home would have given everything away. Kathy must have returned home first, where Steve was with the kids and was then murdered, which I totally agree with that. I mean, you do everything you can possibly do to hide things. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
Kathy's dad, James, began putting signs up along Interstate 10, eventually working his way up to Billboards, accusing the police of either covering up for Steve Page or just doing shoddy police work in general. I mean, Steve had been convicted by a court, even if it wasn't a criminal court, for murdering Kathy. I mean, that was good enough for him. The Billboards have said various things throughout the years, but these are a few examples. Vidor police botched up the case, waiting for confession, and this could happen to you. Other examples, Steve Page brutally murdered his wife in 1991. Vidor PD does not want this case solved. I believe they took a bribe. The Attorney General should investigate. One billboard even includes Kathy and Steve's pictures, but the most powerful signs say, quote, "This is Orange County, City of Vidor. Here you get away with brutally murdering a woman." Dorothy Fulton, Kathy's mother, passed away in 2007, but James is still alive. He is 92 years old, and he says that the Billboards will stay up until he dies, gets a confession, or the police press charges against Steve Page. Over the years, he spent about $200,000 on these signs. Now, this case might sound familiar to all you people, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because while traveling by bus through the southern United States in 1998, British filmmaker Martin McDonagh came across a couple of these billboards. And from Wikipedia, McDonagh described the billboards as, quote, "raging and painful and tragic," and was deeply affected by them, saying that the image stayed in his mind, kept gnawing at me. This incident, combined with his desire to create strong female characters, inspired McDonagh to write the story of 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri. In the 2017 movie, wonderful actress Frances McDormand,
I love her.
stars as Mildred Hayes, a Missouri woman who rents 3 roadside billboards to draw attention to her daughter's unsolved rape and murder. The movie was nominated for 7 Oscars, and they won Best Actress for Frances McDormand and Best Supporting Actor for Sam Rockwell. And this movie brought new attention to the case. And there's now a new chief of police in Vidor, and his name is Rod Carroll. And he says the billboards don't offend him. He acknowledges that Kathy and her surviving family have never had justice. And as far as he's concerned, the person responsible for Kathy's murder is also responsible for a second death. After Kathy's murder, Steve moved to Houston. And to say that Steve didn't want anything to do with Kathy's family, it's an understatement. Steve was now the sole guardian of his and Kathy's children, and this meant that the Page children, Aaron and Monica, no longer had any contact with their mother's family. Yanking a child from a family that had been such a big part of their lives had to take an immeasurable psychological toll on them. And in a way, it's as if their mother's whole family had died. So now they mourned not only their mother, but her whole family. And if they believed in their father's innocence, their anger toward their mother's family had to be equally unfathomable. Unfortunately, the younger daughter, Monica Page, had the most difficult time. She began using drugs and died of a drug overdose in 2011. Some say it was an accident, while others say it was suicide. But it doesn't matter much to Chief Carroll. He considers whoever killed Kathy to be responsible for Monica's death as well. Monica was even younger than her mother at the time of her death. She was only 27 years old. Unfortunately, even after the Oscar-winning movie brought attention to Kathy's case, and even after the death of her daughter Monica, no arrests have been made. If the police were closer to catching her killer, they've not made it public. As of the people involved in this case continue to age, it leaves everyone wondering if justice is going to ever be served. Because if Steve Page is innocent, somebody somewhere is getting away with murder. And that should anger all of Kathy's and Steve's friends and family. If Steve did kill Kathy, he has harmed his children beyond measure, lied to everybody, destroyed the Fultons, and then involved his own family in covering for him. And Steve has said that those billboards has ruined his life. And well, that's one victory that James Fulton can celebrate. So if you have any information on the murder of Kathy Page, please call 1-800-252-TIPS to contact Texas Crime Stoppers, or you can submit a tip to Crime Stoppers online at crimestoppers.com. And all tips are anonymous. And by the way, I read that in 2021, there has been a $50,000 reward for information. So, $50,000 is nothing to sneeze at.
No, it's not. Not to mention getting justice, which I would hope people would do for free.
Yeah. I watched 3 Billboards yesterday, and I thought I had seen it, but I didn't, so it was my first time. And Frances McDormand and Sam Rockwell did an amazing job and totally deserved the Oscars that they got. As far as it matching this story, the only thing is pretty much the billboards and the shoddy police work. You know, it doesn't even go into the Frances McDormand's character of her daughter's death. It's just after the fact. But it's an amazing movie. It's really good. Woody Harrelson is in it. He's fantastic. Peter Dinklage has a part in it. I was going to say small part, but I thought differently of saying that. He's amazing. I love him. But it's a great movie, and if you haven't seen it, you should definitely give it a shot.
It is very good. I highly recommend it. Good job, Jen.
Yeah, and I never knew the story of Kathy Page, and I actually went into watching the movie thinking that it was going to be about Kathy Page, but it's just the billboards.
Yeah, the little creative license
was the
there.
Jumping off part. Yeah. But
well,
it's...
For a parent to do that, that's pretty incredible. Well, for anybody to do that, trying to get justice. So I'm sure that caught the eye of whoever wrote, the movie to try.
And I will tell you that I normally do not listen to podcasts on the subject that we're covering. But our friend Erica Kelly from Southern Fried True Crime
love her too.
Covered this 2018. So I did go back. I had listened to it before, and I went back to listen. And she had a lot of sources on the podcast that we can't use anymore because they have been taken down. So a lot of the info I think she has about how the 2 girls grew up was from a blog that used to be written by Erin. Erin started the blog because every time a new sign would go up, she would get angry, and she felt the need to respond to it in some way. So that's why she started the blog, but the blog has been taken down. so we couldn't read it. And so we kept it out. But if you want to go into it more, Erica does a nice episode on it. It's called 3 Billboards, I believe, and it was done in 2018. Erica always does an amazing job.
Yes, she does.
And
We
she's
love
got
her.
a great voice. We do. She's one of the nicest podcasters we've ever met, if
It's true.
I can be honest. Right?
Very
Love her.
true. I second
Love
that.
her and her husband. She's amazing.
Yeah, they're so cute together.
So, yeah.
Well, good job,
So anyway,
Jen. Yeah, I was always curious
So thanks
about
for the recommendation, too.
I was always
Good.
curious about the backstory on that, but I never looked
Mhm.
into it. I mean, I knew it was based on a real case, partly, but I never,
but never knew the case. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's pretty much seems to me that Steve is responsible. I mean, if the court did find him.
I think he is.
Yeah. I mean, who else would have done it? Who else would have broken into the house
I guess they
while
feel
he was
just-
there?
Yeah. I guess they feel like with the shoddy police work, they don't really have solid evidence. I don't know.
And you have to remember, too, that Chief Mosely knew Steve all his life. So were they friends that he covered up? I mean, I hate to think that happened, but it has happened before.
Oh, yes, it has. In fact, it may be happening pretty recently to a trial. It was in the news, and it was a mistrial.
The Karen Reed case, yes.
That's right. I was not going to say the name because I don't want them to come back.
We don't know.
Me.
That's one of the conspiracy theories is that they're covering up for somebody. But yeah, it's just, you hate to think that happens because, in your mind, you're taught that police people are good and they will help you. But it comes to find out that's not always the case.
No, it is not.
It mostly is. Is. There are.
I think it goes
mostly
to that mostly
good people.
People are good, mostly, but not always,
Exactly.
How many times can we say that? Mostly, but yeah.
Mostly, yes. Yes.
Good job, Jen.
Yes.
I would say, have you been watching anything? But obviously you just watched that movie. So yeah.
I did watch the movie. I do. And I've been watching I'm getting into watching a lot of British TV because we're going over to Britain. I don't know if you know this.
Going across the pond.
Going across the pond. So I've been watching a lot of those British TV shows like Would I Lie to You? I think that's what it's called, which is so fun. I'm watching another one called QI, which is pretty much trivia, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, that's about it with watching things. And I just only watch them when I get ready. I put the TV on and do my hair and my makeup. Put on a little makeup. Good side. So
I can't.
That's
sing.
it.
All right, Jen.
What did you watch? You watching anything?
Not lately.
What'd you watch yesterday? I know you watched probably 10 things yesterday. What'd you watch?
The World's Worst Prisoners.
No, yeah.
Well, it was a continuation, to be fair, but yeah, it's just, and I was, I was writing and stuff, so I was kind of paying attention and kind of not. Let's see what else.
I don't know how you can watch the crime shows constantly. It bogs me down. It bogs my brain. I can't do it.
I've watched everything else, Jed. I'm trying to think of,
but I have to have happy stuff after this.
Well, yeah.
Although I do want you and I to go together and see the new Maxine movie.
See
the Triple X.
I did. Some TikToker yesterday talked about 5 documentaries, and I saved that video, so I'm going to check out those. And they're not crime; they're just documentaries, which I love.
Yeah.
I started to watch The Man with 1,000 Kids. And I didn't make it through that all the way.
There is a girl on TikTok that talks about that. She is a donor. She is the product of a sperm donor.
Oh.
And it was, I believe the doctor was the one.
Oh, yeah. I know that one. This is just like a Danish guy, not very old.
And he was on one of the dating TV shows.
Yeah.
Is who he is. Yeah. And he's got over 1,000 kids. Yeah. She outed him before this went viral. That girl on TikTok outed that guy.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Did we talk about The Worst Roommate Ever season 2 on Netflix? Did we talk about
I haven't seen season 2. I saw season 1, but not season 2. Did that just come out?
Yeah, recently. I did watch all of that, but I think I watched that last week or the week before. But there's some jaw-dropping moments, let me tell you.
Really?
If they're going to be insane, it's okay. But don't bring your insanity to my house. You know what I mean?
Right.
Don't move in with me. I don't know. We need to talk. You need to watch it.
Well, I'll watch it. You said it was on Netflix?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. Remember, they had season 1, and then this is season 2. And
I get confused on which, if it's Hulu.
Yeah. No, it's Worst
Amazon
Roommate Ever, I think is the name of it. Just people, I tell you.
Yeah.
They just, when I think they can't shock me anymore, they do.
Oh, I know.
Right?
They always do. People go really, 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 really low. So
it's crazy. But yeah, that's about it for me. So, TV wise, I check it out every day to try to see what else is new, what else is on, what I haven't seen. No. So yeah.
Haven't really watched any, but been catching up with my one daughter. She just got back from Peru. So I'm listening to all her adventures.
Got rid of the other one.
Got the other one. The other one is at Myrtle Beach right now. She's just texted me and said she is going to go eat somewhere and then go paddleboarding. So
that's so cute. Aww.
She is my big water baby.
That's cute. Well, I like it. I'm here for it.
Yep. But other than that, I'm just hanging out.
We're about midway through the summer, kind of, give or take.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, and while we're at it, if you guys are interested in going to the UK with us, so the Dark History Tour, we still have about 5 seats available, I believe, maybe 4. So book your seats. On the end of this episode in the show notes, I will put all the information on where you can go to book and look at our big trip. But we start in Scotland, do some ghosty tours, some crime tours, all sorts of good things. Then we go to York with more of the same for a few days. And then we end up in London where we go to the Tower of London. And I guess the last night we're going to do Jack the Ripper, who there's an interesting person on TikTok with Jack the Ripper too. I'll talk about that in the next episode. And then we're going to do a murder mystery dinner on the final night. And you can come with us, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We've already got some great men and women coming with us. Met them all online on the tour app, and it's going to be so much fun.
It's going to be so
much fun. I can't wait.
I've never seen you this excited.
I am excited. That's why I'm watching all these British shows.
I guess maybe that's what I need to do then.
I know. I'm watching the British shows. I'm listening to British podcasts. And we could talk about that next episode too. And I'm trying to get an ear for the dialect, right? So I can understand people when we're going.
Actually, that is funny you said that. My sister gave me a TV show that is centered in Scotland because she's like, sometimes it's really hard to understand their accent.
Mm-hmm. The Scottish and the Welsh, which are right around the same area. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. No, I've been trying.
I'm excited. I'm excited though.
All right. So anyway, I think that's it for now.
That's it. Okay.
Hit us next week.
We will see you next week. Until then, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from Octoberpod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.